Welcome to Test, Optimize, Scale. Very excited to have Frank Frausto here today. Good friend of mine, fellow speaker. I think I've been on stage with Frank in 4 states. 4 states now.
Right. Yeah.
And Frank has a long time background in ad tech, entrepreneurship, overall business growth. Frank was involved directly with the Google Ads product at a high level for over 12 years. Now is the CMO at Beyond Enterprises. A lot of great things to talk about with Frank today. Frank, thanks for being on the show here.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this, Jason. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. And I kind of went into a few key points there, kind of understated the fact that when I think of a strong understanding of the Google Ads product, the data science, the predictive and categorical elements behind it, you are the first person that comes to mind. So I was hoping we could hop into your story, hear more about your path, your journey to get here today, and dive as deep as we can into Google.
Yeah, sure. No, happy to. My story, I guess, I'm born and raised in the Bay Area, California, live in San Jose, California, graduated from San Jose State in 2003. And it was along that time, you'll have to remember also, that's right in the middle of the dot-com burst, right? Like the dot-com bubble had popped. Right as, I was a freshman, people were getting, $100,000 salaries right out of college. And I thought, this is going to be great. The dot-com thing is going crazy. I'm going to be making tons of money. And then by my sophomore/junior year, you were lucky to get, any kind of job coming out of college. Well, there was one company that kind of survived all of that and was right in my backyard, and it was Google. And I remember during my digital marketing or online marketing class, that a guy named Doug Edwards came in, and he was the chief marketing officer at Google and told us all about how awesome Google was and how it's a great place to work, and they play roller hockey at lunch, and there's 3 meals a day, and you can bring your kids and bring your dogs and all this stuff. And so I graduated, and that was the only place that I applied. And luckily, after many trial and error and applying to multiple different things, I was lucky enough to get a job at Google pre-IPO in 2003 and worked my way up from there. At that point, there were like fewer than 500 employees. We all fit in one building. But you could tell from an early stage that it was going to be this rocket ship, this category defining brand that just had this grand vision. And when I started there, I was always in the ads department. So I was approving and disapproving the ads based on a binder full of policies that you had to memorize, and then either approve ads or disapprove and so on and so forth. So basically the stuff that's automated now, that was what I was doing when I first started there. Eventually would work my way up, and you would do support, and then you would do ad builds and optimizing things. And we were, that gave me such an amazing opportunity to get exposed to literally thousands of different types of companies, large and small. And how do they think about advertising? How does like a mom and pop, restaurant or coffee shop or automobile repair garage think about advertising versus how does a company like a Fortune 500 company think about advertising, especially something that is so small at the time of digital marketing? How do they think about TV, print, and radio? And then what do we do with this kind of new thing called digital marketing? And that gave me the opportunity to really work on thousands of different marketing campaigns over time. Eventually moved on to help start the first inside sales team at Google. So this was us now reaching out to CEOs, reaching out to companies that had no idea what digital marketing was, and convincing them to pull TV, print, and radio dollars away from those established mediums and try out digital marketing, and how to set the right expectations with clients, and how to make sure that they've got the right KPIs and the mindset and the right budget and whatnot. So that was a major pivot or major shift for me. Eventually, after a few years of that, they asked me to be the head sales trainer at Google. So anybody that came into the program, how do we ramp them up, not just on Google best practices, so Google training and all of the different products and whatnot, but also sales tactics, how to talk to clients, how to set expectations, all of that stuff. Eventually did that for about 3 to 5 years. They asked me to take that training experience and take that over to the channel sales team. Channel sales team meaning kind of like the Google Partners program. So how does Google work with those top tier companies like the big six agencies? How do they work with other large resellers of Google products like Reach Local, Haibu, Auto Trader, anyone that's a premier Google partner? They need to get access to the same level of training and the same level of education that internally we get at Google. And if we can do that, that's how Google will enable the long tail, right? The $20 a day accounts that maybe won't get a rep at Google, but you stack up enough of those $20 accounts times millions and millions of small businesses. That's the way that Google attacks that long tail. Well, you need to have a big training program and in-person and at-scale training efforts from Google. And so I was tasked with creating what that looks like. Do they need more product training? Do they need more sales training? Do they need more, events? And then we go speak at those events, all that type of stuff. And so I did that for about 3 to 5 years. And then, around 2017, end of 2017, I looked around and said, you know what, I think I've kind of maxed out my value at Google. I can continue doing this for another 3 to 5 years, or I can take a step outside of Google for the first time. And at this time, 14, 15 years at the same company. That's like 40 years at another company, right? Like when you think of things in Google years. So I kind of came to the realization that I think I want to start my own digital marketing agency. I think I want to consult the companies that I want to work with, so on and so forth. And so I took a step outside of Google, started my own agency, started working with my friend Brad Yassar on a company called Beyond Enterprises, where we do consulting for blockchain-based companies. Or existing companies that are trying to fold blockchain into their existing business models, so on and so forth. Got to work with you and speak with you on a number of different stages, and that's how you and I met. And fast forward to where we are now. That's how we came apart. That's how we came upon jumping on this podcast.
So you're drafted by Google right
Yeah.
out of school, under 500 people there. You're working right on the ad product, making it as effective as possible. They say, hey, now you're going to be attacking it from the business development standpoint. Here's top tier clients. Here's a full spectrum of different industries, budget levels, KPIs, different performance indicators to measure. And then they have you put on the white gloves to talk to the strategic partners. So the groups that have thousands, I would bet even millions in some cases of very small clients that they bridge through their technology with Google. So the first thing I think of when trying to wrap my head around all of that is Frank's probably an amazing problem solver. I know whether you're talking about a big budget, little budgets, any type of business development relationship, there's different obstacles that are met. And you've probably had to do a lot of the critical thinking and are familiar with a lot of the Google policies, maybe put some of those in place yourself to make campaigns work better.
Yep. Absolutely.
And, what is the process like when, because I know it from the agency level, I know it from different startups, and then on the advertising side of larger campaigns from my ad tech history. But what does it look like to build out the standard operating procedures for, channel marketing partners or, the next iterations of the ad tech product in one of the largest, I think the largest advertising products ever?
Yeah. You know what? You would think that it's like there are a lot of SOPs and standard operating procedures, and there are a lot of best practices that are well documented and written down for you to learn from and whatnot. And my experience some of the times was that it's the complete opposite of that. Early on in Google, they said, we don't have an inside sales team. Hey, who wants to be a sales rep? They literally came into one of the meetings and said, who wants to be a sales rep? Raise your hand. And so I raised my hand and I was like, well, how hard could this be? I already am a product expert, right? Like this will be easy to sell the product. And I thought the same thing when I went from being a sales rep to being a trainer. I thought, how hard could this be? I'm already a pretty good sales rep. So teaching other sales reps how to do sales and keeping their attention for 3 to 5 hours at a time and teaching them things that they think they know more about than me. That's gonna be really easy. And it turns out it's incredibly difficult. There's a reason why "how hard could this be" are famous last words. A lot of it was just pure sink or swim. In that we were a category defining brand. No one had ever created a keyword based platform that where you could sell advertising on a pay-per-click model. There was no book, there was no course out there that would teach you how to do that. Likewise, there was no course, or there were not a lot of training programs that would relate specifically to the needs of Google. And so very much it was sink or swim. And so how did I approach some of those things? I approached a lot of it in that, okay, what do I know and what am I good at? I'm good at the product, but I can't just go out and regurgitate the product, the same 3-hour product training on a phone call. All my calls would be 3 hours long. That wouldn't work. So I needed to take that and start to tinker with it and start to develop my own voice in a way that would really resonate with this type of client, whether it be a big client, whether it be a small client. This is the benefits of what I think, or this is the beginnings of what I think a lot of people know now as, value-based marketing, or marketing not just the features, but talking about the benefits. And we had to figure that out the hard way. That's, kind of old hat now, but we had to learn that the hard way. And so you end up doing a lot of trial and error in the field. You learn very quickly what does not work and don't make that same mistake again. And so I think a lot of the process was never repeat a mistake. It's fine to make a mistake, but repeating a mistake too many times could cost you a lot of clients, could cost you a lot of time, effort, and energy, and just not going to get you anywhere. The third thing I think that we really needed to do was really position yourself as an expert. There was such an expectation of, you're on the phone with somebody at Google in like 2005, which people thought robots ran the company at Google. You couldn't get a hold of anybody. So if you were on the phone and talking about the product, talking about Google advertising, talking about, what the right strategy is, or what the right combination of products that advertiser might need, you really had to know your stuff. And so we had to unfortunately we had to draw upon really a lot of our earlier efforts of being account managers and knowing what works, what doesn't, and then kind of put that together with how do I position this in a way that makes the most sense to folks. And then when you start to piece that together, that's how we ended up with the training documentation that I sort of created from the beginning. Was we had to figure things out on our own, what worked and what doesn't. We ended up working with another third party that helped us, codify that into an actual training curriculum that was a lot more polished and whatnot. But so much of it was, and so much of being a problem solver, I think, as you mentioned, Jason, is just really just trial and error, sink or swim, and then learning on the fly. When you make a mistake, learn from it, just don't repeat it, and then move on. And if you do that enough times, chances are you're going to be in a really nice spot because you've sort of course corrected your way from point A to point B. So that was kind of how we did it. There wasn't anything magical to it, just a lot of hard work and trial and error.
Thank you for lifting up the curtain there. Because again, from the outside, I do picture the robots running the show over there. That gives a lot more context. And I love how you said, be authentic, find something that works in terms of messaging, whether that's on the business development front or in operations, or how it applies to marketing. Find something that makes sense and feels real, feels relatable. The trial and error, I mean, the book wasn't written. I want to have that as a poster at our office. Something along those lines. I get asked questions every day about things that are simply unanswerable. We were talking a little bit before the show. I got asked today, hey, election season, a pandemic, what can we expect in terms of ads? So I had to say, well, I've never run ads during a pandemic election before. That likewise, that chapter of the book hasn't been written yet. So being able to make smart tests, being able to not just play off the title of the show here, test, optimize, scale, but being able to figure out what works, what didn't work, what doesn't work, and not making the same mistake twice. They say an expert is someone who has made a mistake every way you can with a given topic, a given area of focus, and, can basically see things before they happen. Like you said, hey, we tried this, that doesn't work. In fact, I already see signs of that potentially occurring. So getting to shape the inner workings of that at a company like Google, very fascinating. Like I mentioned, how to start there before moving to beyond, just because I know what a strong part that plays in your background and being able to train. You told me about some of the conferences and some of the presentations you would do for, I think, 45 minutes, hour and a half to hundreds, even thousands of people at times on exactly how to represent and move conversations forward that are consistent with Google and the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's another pivot too, right? Just going from, individual contributor sales rep to now all of a sudden you're having to train other sales reps or go on the road and speak at a conference or convention. I mean, that's a whole nother skill set that you need to develop, even though you may think, oh yeah, well, I talk on the phone for a living. It's a whole different animal when you get on stage or when you have to, give a talk or teach something and make it entertaining and kind of pay attention to time frames so that you're not going way over time, way under time. I mean, there's so many different things that you need to be cognizant of. There were a lot of different things that I got right and got wrong that way, but the same type of trial and error really comes into play. Believe it or not, I kind of took like a very logical, data-centric approach to making that pivot to public speaker as well. In that I recorded every single talk that I gave and I would rewatch it over and over. And first of all, the sound of your voice, that takes some getting used to. But you would have to rewatch it just to see what you did right, what you did wrong. Man, I was really stumbling there. Or man, I was going way too fast. Or man, I spent way too long talking about XYZ story. Then I should have moved on. And not only would I do that, I would rewatch it 3 times. Once, just normally, sound and video. Once with the sound off, just to see, am I pacing too much? Am I walking too much? Am I like overly frantic with my hands? And third, of just the audio. So how am I sounding if someone is just listening to this? So I would rewatch everything 3 times and kind of, almost break it down the same way if you were an athlete studying game film. That's how I would do it. I had no previous experience really being a public speaker or a public figure of any kind. So I had to just get really good at breaking it down and learning this on my own. And it's amazing when you take that approach, how, you're going to make a mistake, but I wouldn't repeat very many mistakes, just like we were talking about. And you'd be surprised how quickly you would build your proficiency at something you don't have when you give that level of study and that level of detail to it. There was one other thing maybe in that realm too, in the same guise of test optimized scale of, no 2 audiences are the same. So even if you get like a really tight 30 minutes, story or whatnot, you're going to have one group that's, in a different mood, one group that's younger, one group that's older, another group right after lunch. And so they're tired. How do you, build that up? So the way that I would try and optimize toward the talk that I was giving was I would start with some sort of funny story or anecdote or whatnot, and then just gauge the reaction of the audience. They would either laugh or they wouldn't laugh. If they laughed, great. It's going to be that audience is a little bit more receptive to humor. So I would pepper in another joke. And if they laughed at 2 jokes in a row in a span of 5 minutes, then I could be a little bit more casual. If they didn't laugh at that original joke, story, anecdote, I would give it a couple of minutes, come up with one other joke or funny anecdote or whatnot about 3 to 5 minutes later. And if they still didn't laugh after 2 times, then I know, okay, it's a little more of a straight-laced crowd. I'm going to just play this straight. I'm going to not go for other funny stories, examples, anecdotes. There's nothing worse than a speaker or somebody that's doing comedy or whatnot. It's just not working over and over and they still stick to their script. You have to be able to think on your feet a little bit in order to customize and optimize toward your audience, whether it's public speaking, whether it's whether it's any walk of life. But that whole test optimized scale has been, a constant theme throughout my career as I've had to make these different career pivots.
I'm going to start watching my game day tapes after hearing that. I'm inspired.
There you go.
Three different versions.
It's hard the first couple times. I'll tell you, the sound of your own voice is just difficult. But once you get over that, it's really the best way to learn.
Sure. And, the dedication behind it, the learnings from it, it makes perfect sense. And it definitely shows. If anyone who's listening hasn't seen Frank speak before, go onto YouTube. As mentioned, we've done some panels together. I've always, felt like I need to step up my game sitting on the same stage with you there and see the lineup for you afterwards. Not to even mention that you turned me on to bespoke suits, custom fit suits.
There we
And
go.
I imagine that was part of the whole process, maybe came out of one of those muted tapes at some point or
It's
something
true.
along those lines. But yeah, I love how you mentioned the listening. You got to really be in the listening for the crowd, break the wall if you can, but being able to feed off their energy. I try to be the speaker that they want to be listening to. And it's amazing, even the same audience, but a different point in the day can change up that drastically. I do
100%.
these workshops at times, and sometimes they're a bit slower after lunch, or vice versa, or whatever it may be. And you want to make sure they're left with that takeaway. They're left with something that is going to be acted upon from there. And again, I've even quoted you a couple times on stage. The example about experts. I think you like to compare Facebook advertising management to driving a Ferrari, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, coming up with analogies and examples, I think, is the easiest way to get a complex issue across in a way that somebody can understand. We think about marketing all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people that I'm talking to think about marketing once a week for an hour, right?
Mm.
Like, if that. So, a lot of the times I'll just, be sitting and thinking about different analogies or different examples. I think the one you're referring to is, you could have all of the money in the world. You can have, you can have a great campaign, and whatnot. And that's the equivalent of having like a Ferrari car, right? Like, but if you put somebody that doesn't know how to drive or doesn't know how to handle that Ferrari behind the wheel, you're not going to get the most out of that car. You're going to hit speed bumps. You're going to crash and burn a bunch of times. And then you're going to say, man, I spent all that money on that Ferrari, or I spent all that money on that marketing campaign and didn't get anything out of it. Marketing must not work. But that's just not the case. Likewise, you could have, a meager or a modest car, or in this case, a meager budget, or a meager campaign, meaning that, hey, it doesn't have an unlimited budget, and it doesn't, you don't have all the bells and whistles. You have to work within certain parameters. But if you have an expert behind the wheel of that car, or if you have an expert at the helm of that marketing campaign, you will get the most out of that marketing campaign, and you will outperform other Ferrari campaigns, so to speak, right? And it just is a matter of, you can't just rely on having a big budget. You've got to have the right vehicle and the right driver behind that vehicle in order to really have success with marketing.
Oh yeah, and I've seen large brands who said, "Hey, Facebook ads, as an example, an easy one for me actually, didn't work for us." And we lift under the hood and we see all the reasons why. And yeah, you get that professional driver behind the wheel, and that machine just has so many more capabilities
That's
that
right.
aren't even being opened up yet. So, such a perfect example.
That's right.
And taking all this knowledge you have from ad tech, from presentations and overall training abilities, and transitioning to your own agency, partnering with Brad Yassar. We've had Brad on the show here before,
Yeah.
but just to reintroduce to the audience, I first met Brad in the world of equity crowdfunding. He had worked on one of the top campaigns to date, actually. Then got involved in the world of blockchain, various types of fintech, is a very active investor, advisor, and you guys do a lot of fun things over there at Beyond Enterprises, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are one of the foremost, agencies in terms of advisory in the blockchain / cryptocurrency world. So we take on mostly clients in the blockchain world, but now we've taken a few steps out of that. So we have quite a few clients that are non-blockchain as well. But essentially, we are a 360 partner. So you can come to us with a business idea, and a little bit of funding, and we'll help you turn those ideas and dreams into a full-fledged business. We work with people or a lot of blockchain projects that have a white paper, they have a board, they have a little bit of funding, and then they're saying, hey, well, what about design? What type of website should I have? What about my tokenomics? How do I structure this in a way that makes fiscal sense for me to bring this token to market? And in my case, what do I do about marketing? So whenever there is a client that is in need of marketing, whether that is building an audience, whether that is increasing their funding, whether that is bringing more awareness to the project and really kind of building a community, that's where I get involved. And that's really, really fun. I see a lot of parallels to those early days at Google where there's no book written on this thing yet. We're still writing this book in terms of blockchain as we go along. And we're still writing the book in terms of the best practices for marketing. And it seems like those are changing as policies change, as more and more people that are more and more blockchain savvy come into the market. That changes up your strategy. So you're having to test, optimize, and scale our way through it. But we really pride ourselves on working with them and really kind of backwards engineering the KPIs or the goals they're looking to achieve. Whether that is X amount of dollars raised, we can backwards engineer a marketing plan based off of what based off of the customer journey and based off of based off of the what is the word I'm reaching for? The based
overall
off the customer journey,
funnel.
based off the platforms. Thank you. Based off of the platforms that make the most sense for them, so on and so forth. And really just kind of working with them until fruition. We can do a lot of fun and cool stuff at Beyond.
Absolutely. And so you get presented with groups at times that don't have anything set up on the platforms. It's an initial marketing campaign.
Right.
You're trying to set the right foundation, see where you're getting results, and basically optimize towards those pockets of performance all in real time.
That's it. Yeah. A lot of it, it has to do with the same principles of any marketing will work in a blockchain world as well. And my basic philosophy when it comes to clients like that is you just break it down to what your goals are and then what is the customer journey. If you really know your audience, you'll have a good idea of what platforms they use, how do they do research, what hours of the day are they online, how many times are they searching or doing research, and what messages are they really responding to. So a lot of times people come to us and say, I don't know the first thing about marketing. Well, if you really understand your audience and then just map out the customer journey, chances are you've got the foundations or the building blocks of a really strong marketing campaign. You just need to unlock that and then figure out, is this the right campaign to get to where my goals are? Or do we need to augment this? Is there other platforms that we need to add? Do we need to bump up the budget of what we expected? What are other similarly successful companies doing and what have their results been? Once you weigh all of those together, now all of a sudden the answer sort of presents itself, and that's the initial test campaign that you want to run forward with.
It's amazing to me that so many groups want to skip those stages of strategy and just hop into it, even if that is going to result in a lower return. They just want to kind of fail fast, which there's a ideology behind, of course, but starting with strategy, looking at a competitor marketing audit like you were talking about gives you a lot of the clues. Then being able to break down target audiences to A/B test out so you can see how they're performing against each other. I like to break them down to a persona level and have a fictional character. I could talk about the personification of that audience in that sense of what that individual does on the weekends. Like you had mentioned, map out everywhere that they go online, and then being able to evaluate those touch points, be it paid from advertising or organic from content marketing, potentially direct outreach, depending if it's B2B or maybe an investor focused campaign or something along those lines. Even if you have to prioritize which channels you start with, you still know, like, okay, here's where we're beginning. This is why. If that doesn't work, or when we're scaling, we're going to incorporate these things to follow, and having numbers behind all of it. I like to do an algorithm of impressions to clicks to conversions.
That's it.
So if something's not performing, I can identify where. If something is outstanding in terms of industry averages, can ramp that up quicker. But without that, you're kind of shooting in the dark.
That's it. That's it. And that is the most important part of it, is breaking it down into the personas. How do they go about searching or researching? What typical jobs do they have? What pockets of time of their day are they online and on the platforms that we have targeted? So much of that goes into it. If you have firsthand knowledge of your target market, it makes your job so much easier in digital marketing. In fact, it was a big piece of a lot of the training and a lot of the talks that I would do at Google centered around the idea. This is an old school one for a lot of your listeners, but the zero moment of truth, the ZMOT studies that Google did in the early 2000s, that stuff is still so applicable today, if not more, because the zero moment of truth really breaks down how people consume media. It starts with a stimulus. Stimulus is either on TV or an event. Then what's the very next thing? If your car breaks down, you're going to go right to your phone and start doing a typical search pattern. You're going to, go to 3 to 5 different searches. You're going to go to different websites. You're going to go to social media. What are those? That's going to be different with every different, demographic or whatnot. But then based on that zero moment of truth, you're either winning those different touch points or you're not. It's our jobs as marketers to figure out what those touch points are, and then which of those ZMOTs or zero moments of truth really make the most sense, and which ones do we really want to fight for given the budget that we have, all of that type of stuff. And then in terms of like the organic, that's where testimonials and content stuff, all of the organic strategy that you have plays into everybody's second moment of truth, which is me sharing my experience with it, which then becomes somebody's stimulus, and it all plays back. It all starts in this kind of cyclical cycle. So, it's an oldie but a goodie, but that's those zero moment of truth studies that Google has, which I think are still available on thinkwithgoogle.com. That's a big piece of like what I would do and talk through. And still in my own agency, that's like where we start, is breaking down what that customer journey is. What are your ZMOTs? How do we create the right stimulus? And then where are the different touch points? Once you outline that, then you just test it against whatever your KPIs are. And then once you get to an optimal level, you can scale out. So, I mean, it really is, it's very logical in its thinking, which I love, coming from a Google guy, right? Data is king.
Yes.
But when you break it down that way, now all of a sudden it's not so scary to a lot of advertisers or to a lot of clients. You can have much more of a business discussion, rather than, I think where most clients get intimidated is when you start using all those crazy acronyms, the CPL, the ROI, the ROAS, all that stuff. That's where they just say, hey, just take this and run with me. But you've really got to break down with the client who their target market is. And once you sort of line things up like this from a media consumption and a consumer journey standpoint, now all of a sudden the rest is so much easier.
Oh yeah. And like you said, acronyms, getting too technical, things can just go over the head. You break it down of, these are the target audiences. Here's their zero moment of truth. The second moment, how do we replicate that, online? How do we really tap into that psychograph? Gets to be a lot of fun. And do you find that you point at Google products quite a bit in these discovery sessions with clients? Are there some hidden gems that the audience should potentially test out, whether that is a placement in Gmail or YouTube for retargeting? Or is there anything where you say, wow, if more people knew about this, if more people tested it out, they could see a return quicker, or maybe not a return, but some type of traction towards their measurable result faster?
Yeah, I tend to go where it makes the most sense for the client. So if we map out what their customer journey is, and there are certain keywords that make a lot of sense, and those key terms are affordable, then certainly we would use Google Ads or whatnot. Or if their goal is more of an awareness campaign, then using the content network within Google the display network tends to work really well along with YouTube. Most clients, it tends to center more around Facebook or whatnot. It really just depends, right? There's no one size fits all approach. That's, going back to what you were talking about with like the tailored suits and all that type of stuff. I named my agency Tailor Made Digital Marketing, kind of around that idea of there's not a one size fits all approach. Every single client needs a custom crafted or a custom tailored solution. The same way that there's not an off the rack suit that's going to fit you and me. Whereas if we each get our measurements and we can, get our preferences, we can have something that is tailored to us that's going to be perfect every single time. That's the approach that I use. Are there some hidden gems? I still think YouTube, for some reason, is really under the radar in terms of the returns and the exposure that you can get, just because it's such a huge thing. I remember when we acquired YouTube, it was such a massive thing. We were thinking, oh, well, like this, this little, type of, what are they? They're going to put TV shows on there. It's like, daily videos, cute puppy videos, Charlie bit my finger, all that type of stuff. We had no idea it was going to be as huge as it is. And there are hundreds of hours of content uploaded every minute. And it's still the second largest search engine in the world, right?
Yeah.
So just from a pure search engine standpoint, if you're looking for economical keywords to run on, you can run on keywords, key terms that you're using on other platforms on YouTube just to try it out. Then there's always so much new content coming up. There are almost an infinite number of videos that you can run content across, whether it's pre-roll or whether it's one of the other ad formats or whatnot. So I think that YouTube tends to be a good solution for most people, but that said, you still need to go through the work of getting their measurements and figuring out what's really going to work for them.
Oh yeah, YouTube, and looking at video view and the cost around it and distribution of video, which is one of the most, if not the most engaging form of content, depending on the audience, is powerful and underrated, even for a direct response advertiser, to be able to figure out where it goes in the funnel, where I think video often gets associated just with branding versus direct response, one of those two categories for ads. And it's great how you talk about it. Oh yeah, back when we acquired this little video company.
That's
YouTube,
right. That's right.
We're glad to see how they've shaped up. But no, I think that's great. And one question I get asked a lot on the phone, and I guess going to the format of the show here an extent, is what do we do if things aren't working? That age-old question, because there's no guarantees whether you're buying from Google, they're not an affiliate network. If you're setting up a campaign with Beyond, and this is an initial launch or some type of, reactivation where there's new milestones being reached, what happens? You get a week in, a month in, what have you, and the results are not to the projections.
Yeah.
What is the approach at that point? How have you seen things optimized to the best state? What could listeners do if they find themselves, or I should say when they find themselves in that situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the best cure is prevention. So I would say step one is try not to get into that situation. People get into that situation because usually they have a client ready to get online and just want to run online and just want to get things going, or they haven't worked with them enough to understand what success looks like to them. And that's one of the things that, that was a big aha moment for me when I was in sales at Google. And, now with my own agency, is before we onboard anybody, we need to really define what does success look like. 30 days or, 3 months from now, we're going to be looking at this together and saying, Frank, this is working great, and here's how I know, or Frank, this is not working, and here's how I know. What does that mean to you? Is that X amount of people, X amount of signups, X amount of sales, a certain CPL that you're looking to get? And then you need to understand, once you have that, it's your job as a marketer to really understand, can I hit this or not? Right? Like, it's your job. If you are the driver behind the wheel, can I actually get this car around the track, or is this thing going to blow up? Because they're going to blame you as the driver if you don't win the race, or that thing doesn't make it around the track. So you need to be honest with yourself and honest with the client to say, hey, yeah, I think these are very achievable, or, you know what, I've ran the numbers and I just don't know if your expectations are realistic. You're looking to get a $50 CPL, and what I'm seeing, best in class companies are around $70 CPL. Do you still want to do this or not? I would rather lose a client because they had unrealistic expectations and we can walk away as friends, rather than have an upset client because I didn't do my job as a marketer and set their expectations the right way. Let's say that you do, you just don't know, or the book isn't written, or it's a new blockchain type of client, and we just don't know. We think we can get to the $50 CPL, but we just don't know. That's where you have to sort of, this is the, testing on the fly or the sink or swim in me, where I think this really prepared me, is you just need to eliminate as many variables as you can and control what you can control. So
Sure.
what are the variables and where do we think we went wrong? It either went wrong on the creative or the copy or the targeting or the platform. Which of these four do I think we are failing on? And you're looking for symptoms, much like a doctor, symptoms of, hey, the copy isn't working. Symptoms of, hey, we've targeted the wrong audience. Symptoms of the platform is the wrong platform. And those come in various, shapes and sizes, as you know. But once I've diagnosed the symptoms, then you go back to the client and say, hey, I think we targeted the wrong platform, or I think this creative isn't working. This is what I would like to do. At some point, if you keep going back and all those iterations aren't working, you may have to have a difficult conversation with the client and say, hey, rather than going through and exhausting the rest of this marketing budget, we may want to scale back a little bit and go back to testing phase or test out a bunch more things for a couple of weeks, rather than just push through and really kind of push the car too hard so it blows up type of thing. But essentially, looking for and diagnosing each of those causes is a big part of being a digital marketer. When something isn't working, then you'll have an actionable item to work on, rather than just scrap the whole thing, or hey, this isn't working, so let's just pull the plug. You've got to identify those variables that you can control, and then keep sort of working or keep massaging each one of those until you find a solution that'll really work for the client.
Yeah. It almost sounds like what you're describing in your days at Google, and now putting that into processes for how you're launching campaigns and being able to have that operating system structure of, okay, we're front loading as much as possible and trying to prioritize where we're going. That way we're not making these mistakes. But if they do happen, we're going to look at these four things. If it's not the creative, the copy, the audience, the channel, we're going to be able to test out some new things in terms of what we can look to see results from to follow. But by refining the process and having that consistency, you're in a much better place than just cutting it, saying something didn't work, or even on the flip side, if it is, just thinking that consistency will always be there.
That's it. You're very much like a doctor, right? Like a doctor, the patient comes in and says, hey, I'm not feeling well. You can just put them on some heavy prescriptions, or I would want my doctor to ask me some pertinent questions about what specifically isn't working or what specifically they're going through, and then have a specific diagnosis from there. So think of, for other agency owners and other marketers that are out there, think of yourself as a doctor. Do you have enough information to just start putting this client on heavy meds or heavy prescriptions? Or is it my duty to really kind of ask some pertinent questions to really get down so that I'm making the right diagnosis, not just any diagnosis?
I like it. We're going to lose all of our pharmaceutical sponsors, but I like it. No, you want something that's sustainable, not a quick fix. We have been able to patch things up or make them look good for a week if needed, but transparent with the client about it. If you want to see this, what we've done, but it's not going to be replicatable. So, that's a great background to be able to provide there. And what about scaling? What have you been able to scale to get to your stages of success here today? Or have you seen in client campaigns or just in categories of client campaigns for you? Because I know you've run such a high volume at this point. But when things are working, you've optimized them to a good point, the processes are paying off. What is the right mindset to scale?
Yeah. Good question. So there's a lot that can go into that. So whether it is, yourself as an agency owner, or whether you're a marketer working on specific campaigns, I always like to scale intelligently. I don't just like to 10x whatever you're doing, right? Like Google has a 10x culture of, hey, if we do this and we can 10x this, let's just go for it. Versus when you're dealing with, other people's money or even your own money and other people's time and effort and all of that. I like to be very a little more conservative with it than that. So I like to scale intelligently. So don't just, jump off a cliff and find that hey, something worked, so let's just put all our chips behind it. Scale intelligently. And even if that means it's going to take 2, 3, 4 weeks to scale up this marketing campaign to a level where we're happy with it, the client is happy with it, I would much rather do that, because if you make a mistake along the way of scaling, or you found that you just had a lucky or unlucky streak, you're minimizing those efforts. I think another thing when you're thinking about scaling is to not just think that, hey, I just scale this one thing and then that's all I need to do as a marketer forever. One of the other sort of Googleisms or truisms that we would say at Google is always be testing, ABT. So there's always be closing,
Nice.
Always be testing. Testing never ends. Even when you found a campaign that you scale, that campaign still has a shelf life, or still theoretically has a shelf life. It's very much like in the recording industry. You've got a hit single and everybody loves it, great. Like you shouldn't be thinking, well, I never have to write another song again. That song has a shelf life, and that song will be popular for a while, but in a year, is it still going to be on top of the charts? Probably not. You still need to go back to the drawing board and still get, still be writing songs and putting out music and testing so that you have the next one. They have a word for people that just rely off of, one huge campaign or one huge song. Those are one-hit wonders. You hear they have this one huge song and then you never hear from them again. I think in marketing, there are a lot of one-hit wonders because they think, okay, I've tested and I optimized. Now I just got to scale, and that's the holy grail. You should always be testing because there could be a shelf life to this. You may get to a point where you've reached the entire share of voice, and at some point you can't scale any further. And furthermore, that ad or that creative or whatever makes that ad or that campaign so profitable may wear off after a while. The same way a song wears off after a while. Right? Like it may be a great song, but do you want to hear that song 6 months from now, like the same radio play? It's probably going to wear off. Likewise, your campaigns can wear off. You don't want to just have the same ads today that you ran a year ago, the same ads you ran 3 years ago, because people will eventually get desensitized to it. So as a rule of thumb, I like to always be testing, even off of those campaigns that I've scaled. Always be looking for whatever the next ad is or whatever the next creative is, and refresh those every 3 to 4 months or so as a rule of thumb. Just because something is scaling well now doesn't mean it's going to scale, and doesn't mean that's like the holy grail. I think that your scaled campaigns allow you to test more things in the background, allows you to test more audiences, more ads, more copy, and that then in turn can be scaled up from there. But don't just say, okay, cool, I've tested, I've optimized, I've scaled this one campaign, I'm done. Otherwise, you might be a one-hit wonder in the marketing world.
Don't be a one-hit wonder in the marketing world. You're right. You can't have your hands tied. That performance drops out. There's nothing for you to look towards, especially if you've turned off all the other campaigns that are producing at lower levels. You could have your evergreens, but always need to be testing out something new. Such right. Great tips to walk away with. And, to wrap everything up here, you've given us a lot of amazing things to walk away with, test for ourselves, good mindset of what to do when things aren't working and how to scale here. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with today? Any parting recommendation, if you will?
I think some of the things I learned at Google were, one, data is king. That's one of the Googleisms. Data is king. Everything is based off of your data. Two is always be testing. And this idea of test, optimize, scale was really kind of embedded into Google culture. We just didn't know it. But so I love this kind of philosophy, and it's kind of a lifestyle, right? Because test, optimize, scale, I've used it for when I'm speaking and when I'm training. It's not just in the marketing world. You can use it also when you are, when you're doing a new diet or exercise program. You don't want to just go, head first into something. Test it out, see how you feel for a little bit, and then optimize and scale. So I like test, optimize, scale as really kind of a lifestyle. And above all, I think just the ability to be flexible was the thing that I took away from all that time at Google. The one constant is change. A company that moves as quickly as Google, as scales as quickly as Google, you have to be thinking on your feet. There is no kind of same old. There's no routine that you can really settle into, because the change is so rapid. And I feel the same way in the marketing world, whether you are a agency owner or just a marketer and handling your own campaigns. Look at the environment that we're currently in right now. We've never gone through, as of this taping right now, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Things are still locked down. We've got an election around the corner. These are crazy times for a marketer. So you need to be able to think on your feet. If you make a mistake, that's okay. Just don't repeat a mistake, but be flexible enough that you stay on top of things so that you can sort of figure out your path from point A to point B. That flexibility and being able to roll with the punches is crucial, and that'll get you through any tough times. That'll get you through any tough marketing campaigns, so on and so forth.
Brilliant. If the listeners follow that, I'm sure we're getting a lot of emails on how the results are turning out in the coming weeks here. And just to wrap up, if someone wants to get in contact with you, what is the best way to do so?
Sure. So on LinkedIn is really easy. It's Frank Frausto. So linkedin.com/Frank Frausto. Frausto spelled Frausto. On Facebook, it's really easy. Just search for Frank Frausto. On LinkedIn, it's Frank Frausto Jr. So just add JR to the end of my name. My agency is Tailor Made Digital Marketing. So be on the lookout, or you go to tailormadedigitalmarketing.com. And then Beyond Enterprises as well. So Beyond Enterprises, Enterprises with a Z.com, to learn a little bit more about what Brad and I have set up. And we work with you from time to time on some of those campaigns as well, Jason.
Yes.
So it's a great organization. Hope if anybody has any questions, please reach out.
Yeah, always excited to work with you guys. I know you've been part of some of the top 100 coins out there in cryptocurrency, going beyond that with Beyond these days as well too, and always some of the top products in the top emerging verticals, of course, with your expertise in ad tech and overall entrepreneurship as well. So thank you again for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Frank.